Right, we now come to the statement. I call the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'll make a statement on the new border security agreements we have reached with Germany and with the Calais group of interior ministers from the UK, France, Germany, Belgium and the Netherlands, which met in London yesterday with Europol, Frontex and the European Commission to discuss strengthening action against small boat crossings and organised immigration crime. But first, in the light of the fast-moving events in the Middle East, yesterday at the Calais Group we also discussed the situation in Syria, and I want to briefly address that issue first. As the Foreign Secretary told the House, we welcome the fall of the Assad regime, but we continue to monitor closely this fast-moving situation where there is significant risk of instability. Considering this, I have taken the decision to temporarily pause decisions on Syrian asylum claims. All 5 Calais Group countries have taken the same decision. We will, of course, continue to keep all guidance relating to these asylum claims under constant review, and we will keep the House updated in the normal way. Mr. Speaker, last week I updated the House on the new agreement the government has reached with the Iraq government and the Kurdistan regional authorities to tackle organised immigration crime. And this week we have reached new strengthened agreements closer to home. Smuggler and trafficking gangs have been allowed to get away with their vile trade in people for far too long. Britain needs strong borders and a properly controlled and managed asylum and immigration system, and for the last 5 years we have had the opposite. That is why we are prepared to do the hard graft, to get the system back under control and tackle the gangs long before they reach our shores. Immediately after the election, we began to strengthen our international collaboration to go after those criminal gangs, including increasing National Crime Agency officers in Europol, setting up the new Border Security Command and the new agreement with the G7. Already, strengthened collaboration is delivering results. In the last few weeks alone, we have seen the arrest of a major suspect in the supply of boats and engines to the Channel involving close cooperation between Belgium, the Netherlands and the UK. A major operation last week against a Syrian and Iraqi Kurdish gang operating through Germany and France was led by French police but supported with intelligence from the National Crime Agency and involving 500 German police officers, delivering not just a series of arrests of suspected gang members, but also the seizure of multiple boats and engines destined for the Channel too, boats that could have led to thousands of people making dangerous journeys. Criminals need to know that there will be no hiding place. The gangs who undermine our border security facilitating small boats crossing the Channel are also facilitating dangerous and illegal journeys into other European countries and committing wider crimes, including serious violence, exploitation, money laundering and drug trafficking. These gangs operate across borders, and therefore we need law enforcement cooperation across borders to bring them down. New systems to work across different prosecutorial and legal systems, rebuilding basic intelligence sharing and cooperation that was damaged under the last government's post-Brexit arrangements, and new expertise that is needed to deal with the evolving threats. So this week, I have signed a landmark agreement with my German counterpart, Minister Nancy Faeser, to tackle irregular migration. This new joint action plan is the first of its kind between the UK and Germany. It includes much stronger operational cooperation, information and intelligence sharing, including very practical basic measures, such as increasing the use of the Siena Europol system by the National Crime Agency to share information with German police to swiftly pursue investigations, stronger partnerships to deliver prosecutions, new work to take down social media content which is being used as advertising by organised smuggler gangs, joint working and coordination with transit and source countries, supporting each other on returns and establishing the first German international liaison officer in the Border Security Command. Importantly, the joint action plan means strengthening the law in Germany to tackle people smugglers.
We know that gangs are routing many supply chains through Germany, including using warehouses to store boats and engines that are destined for the Channel. So clarification of the law in Germany will mean that activities facilitating migrant smuggling to the UK in Germany will be a criminal offence. This is a major change which will make it easier for German prosecutors to dismantle supply chains, prosecute the smugglers involved, and it means in Germany and across Europe we are sending a clear message to the smugglers. Activity to smuggle people into the UK is a criminal offence and you will be prosecuted and brought to justice. And Germany and the UK will also work together through Europol to investigate the end-to-end criminal activity of some of the Kurdish gang networks which are operating in both our countries in cooperation with the Iraqi government and Kurdish authorities following the agreements that I reached in Iraq. This joint action plan embodies our shared determination to pursue organised immigration crime, but it also reflects the same determination and commitment shared across other near neighbours embodied in our meeting with the Calais Group in London yesterday. So I strongly welcome the new announcements from the French Interior Minister to increase the police presence and enforcement along the French coast through the winter, alongside the appointment of a new coastal prefect. The increased violence we've seen on the beaches towards French police is a total disgrace. The Calais Group also agreed a new plan to strengthen action across our 5 countries, including a range of actions backed by an end-to-end approach to tackling migrant smuggling networks from the French coast through to source and transit countries, including Vietnam and Central Africa. This includes stronger enforcement capability through Europol, targeting the illicit finance model of migrant smuggling networks, taking down social media advertising, and coordinated preventive communications to deter people from paying gangs to arrange dangerous, irregular journeys. And we also discussed at the Calais Group the major escalation of enforcement activity we are undertaking here in the UK, because immigration and asylum rules need to be respected and enforced, and for too long they have not been. So over the summer, we have moved 1,000 more staff into returns and enforcement activity. It has already led to nearly 10,000 returns since the election, with enforced returns up 19%, voluntary returns up 14%, and during the summer, enforcement officers completed more than 3,000 enforcement visits against employers, more than 2,000 arrests, and a substantial increase on the previous year. And we discussed the need to drastically scale up all of these operations over the next 12 months to ensure words turn into decisive action against the gangs. As part of these efforts, we also yesterday published the mission statement for the Border Security Command, setting out the approach to increase enforcement capacity in the UK and Europe, drawing the best intelligence and enforcement practice from across the police, NCA, Border Force and our intelligence agencies. In the years before this government came to office, criminal gangs were allowed to take hold right along our borders, establishing a criminal industry profiting from misery, exploitation and putting lives at risk. The terrible consequences of this phenomenon have been clear for too many years. The fatalities in the Channel as people risk their lives on dangerous journeys, border security undermined, public trust in the immigration system eroded, while criminal gangs make millions in profits. They cannot be allowed to get away with it. So instead of those failures of the past, this government has a serious and sensible plan to strengthen our border security and fix our broken asylum system, a plan based on grip, not gimmicks, and on serious international partnership. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for the timely sight of her statement today. Firstly, on Syria, I thank the Home Secretary for her comments. We certainly support this government's efforts and the efforts of other governments around the world to try and ensure a transition to a stable government in Syria that can ensure the return of peace. We also support the suspension of asylum processing, and I'm glad the government decided to suspend that a few hours after I called for it yesterday. But in respect of asylum claims, will the Home Secretary agree that given most, if not all, of these asylum claims are predicated on the threat posed to the individual by former President Assad. Now that threat has gone and the basis for the asylum claim has gone, it would be reasonable to ask those Syrians claiming asylum on that basis, or recently granted asylum on that basis, to return once safe. And finally, regarding Syria, the Prime Minister, as the Leader of the Opposition, asked the Prime Minister a little earlier if the Prime Minister would ensure that no former UK residents who are in Syria who supported the murderous Daesh regime which killed and raped innocent women and children, which persecuted minorities and which severely persecuted its opponents. Can we make sure those people do not return to the UK? In government, the Conservatives made sure those people didn't return, the Shamim and Begum case as an example of that. So will the Home Secretary take similarly robust action to make sure those people who supported Daesh do not return to the United Kingdom? I think the House would appreciate that assurance. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, turning to the question of small boats and border security, the Home Secretary asserted, I must say rather boldly, that her approach is, and I quote, delivering results. So let's have a look at what results are. I'm afraid the facts don't bear that out. Let's have a look at the results that are actually being delivered. In the 150 days since the election, more than 20,000 people dangerously and illegally crossed the English Channel. That is 18% up on the same 150 days the previous year. I don't call an 18% year-on-year increase delivering results. That is a failure. Why are these figures up year on year? Well, the National Crime Agency told us we need a deterrent, that law enforcement alone won't be enough, and yet the government cancelled the Rwanda deterrent before it even started. The first flight was due to take off on the 24th of July, and they cancelled it before it even took off. Now, of course, we welcome the work on law enforcement, which continues the work done by the previous government. But according to the NCA, that alone will not be enough. We need a deterrent. When will she introduce one? Now, in the spirit of examining her claim she is delivering results, let's look at their record on asylum hotels. They promised in their manifesto to close down and end the use of asylum hotels. Well, we've recently got some figures which demonstrate in the 3 months following the election, far from reducing asylum hotel use, they increased it by 6,066 people in places like Peterborough and in Altrincham. Constituencies now represented by Labour MPs having asylum hotels opened up in express contradiction of their own manifesto commitment. And now let's say a word about removals. Now, it is welcome that the rising trend of overall removals has gone up, continuing the trend under the previous government, although I observe that almost all of those removals were to European and North American countries. But on the topic of small boats, the Home Secretary didn't break out the small boat returns numbers. Now, I wonder why that was. Well, I've looked into the figures, and it turns out that in the 3 months after the election, less than 5% of people crossing by small boat were in fact returned. But more than that, the number of people returned having crossed by small boat in the 3 months after the election was in fact lower than the number returned in the 3 months prior to the election. So the numbers returned from small boats, in fact, went down under this government. Now, she mentioned criminal gangs, and I'm glad the work started under the last government, including by my right honourable friend, the member for Braintree, is being continued, including international cooperation that he pursued both as Foreign Secretary and as Home Secretary. But I'll ask the Home Secretary this: why in opposition did she vote against life sentences for people smugglers? Now, finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, we heard a bit about the discussion in the Calais group yesterday, and of course, cooperation is important. We cooperated when in government as well. But there are one or two questions I wonder if she had the chance to ask her French opposite number. So the first question is, will the French accept returns of people crossing the Channel? Because that would provide a very, very powerful deterrent. And the post-EU exit documentation, the political declaration, as she will know, expressly allows individual member states to engage in bilateral arrangements in relation to borders. So did she raise that with her French counterpart, and what did her French counterpart say? Secondly, was she able to ask her French counterpart whether France would intercept these small boats close to the French shore, as the Belgians safely do? In Belgium, it's resulted in a 93% reduction in crossings. If the French would do the same, intercept near the shore, that would have a very dramatic effect. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Home Secretary said she is delivering results, but these are the results. Crossings up 18%, asylum hotels up 6,066, and small boat returns down under the new government. She is delivering results. I'm afraid they're worse.
Home Secretary. I have to just gently point out to the Shadow Home Secretary that his party left us with the highest level of small boat crossings in the first half of the year on record. The highest level for that season on record. If we had carried on with small boat crossings at the level that they were in the first half of the year when he was in the Home Office, there would have been thousands more arrivals that we would have had to deal with over the last few months. When he was Immigration Minister, of course, point out to him as well that small boat crossings increased around tenfold because he let these criminal gangs take hold along the channel. They built an entire criminal industry on his watch that he did nothing to stop. And that is why we are having to deal with these criminal gangs now. And as for returns, just generally point out to him, by the time they left office, returns were down more than a quarter compared to the last Labour government because of their continued failure on returns to even get the system working. That is why we have put substantial additional resources into returns, into actually making sure that the rules are enforced, which they simply have not been for far too long. And as for the asylum backlog, perhaps he will also take responsibility for the total crashing of the asylum system in the last few months before the general election, when his party and the Home Office that he was a part of ended up cutting asylum decisions in the last few months before the general election by more than 70% compared to the beginning of the year. A shocking dereliction of duty, which meant we have had to then deal with and handle the increased backlog that his party left behind over the summer, getting that back under control. There are some important issues around the decisions on asylum cases for Syria. And let's be clear, many of the claims that have been made against the Assad regime, for asylum against the Assad regime, which is clearly not in place. It would therefore not be appropriate to be granting asylum decisions on those cases in the current circumstances. We do need to monitor the evolving situation so that we can get new country guidance in place and so that we can take those decisions. But we will do that in a sensible and serious way, which is about getting the asylum and the immigration systems back in control. In contrast to, frankly, the Shadow Home Secretary and the party opposite, who seem simply to want to go back to the Rwanda scheme, which I point out to them once again cost £700 million for the taxpayer and sent just 4 volunteers to the Kigali. The most shocking waste of public money over 2 years on a failing scheme. All they did was gimmicks instead of ever getting a grip. And all the Shadow Home Secretary wants to do is turn the clock back to failure again.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it is so refreshing to have a Home Secretary who is actually targeting those who are exploiting refugees. And I understand what she's saying about the evolving situation in Syria, and I welcome what she just said about new country guidance. Can I press her a little bit more, though, because she will understand and recognise the Syrian community that we have in this country, which many of us have been proud to welcome and support as refugees, is unsettled. There are 6,500 claims in process. When does she expect to be able to have a refreshed assessment? We know the situation in Syria is very uncertain at the moment. Can she give them some comfort about the direction of travel here, please?
I would say to my honourable friend, we are obviously reviewing the situation as swiftly as possible. We have withdrawn the previous Syria country guidance. It would not have been appropriate to take decisions on that basis, and we are monitoring the situation closely to look at how and when new country guidance can be drawn up. She will understand that there is obviously considerable uncertainty about what is happening in Syria. We have welcomed the removal of the Assad regime. However, there is still very much that is unknown about what will happen in Syria next, and that is why we have to be serious about this and monitor the situation closely. Other countries are doing the same.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Lisa Smart.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to thank the Home Secretary for her statement as well as advance sight of it. So first, on Syria, this is a fast-moving situation. It's absolutely right that the temporary pause on decisions on Syrian asylum claims is kept under constant review. The UK should be doing all it can to help secure an orderly transition of power in Syria in accordance with international law, and the government should move to offer these asylum seekers and others certainty about their claims as soon as possible. We welcome the government's attempts to tackle people smuggling gangs who send vulnerable people on perilous journeys across the Channel. And we also appreciate them working closely with our European neighbours on this, instead of blaming them like the previous Conservative government did all too often. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that as well as bilateral agreements with states and the Calais Group, such as the ones she signed yesterday, we need to work even more closely with interstate agencies like Europol, as she mentioned, but also Eurojust, to restore real-time access for UK police to the EU-wide data sharing systems that identify and arrest these criminals, cooperation and access that we shamefully lost under the Conservatives. Madam Deputy Speaker, we should not forget how we ended up in this mess. The asylum backlog ballooned thanks to the last Conservative government, and there are thousands currently waiting for their claims to be processed. So can I ask the Home Secretary to update the House on what progress she and colleagues are making in tackling this backlog? Will she commit to establishing a dedicated unit to improve the speed and quality of asylum decision-making and introduce a service standard of 3 months for all but the most complex asylum claims to be processed? Many of the people we're talking about are incredibly vulnerable. They're fleeing war, persecution and famine. Does the Home Secretary not agree with me that we have to tackle this problem at source? And what conversations has the Home Secretary had with the SCDO about boosting international development spending and cooperation to tackle the root causes of these numerous refugee crises?
Thank you, Honourable Member, for her point. And she raised firstly asylum claims from Syria. This is something we discussed at the Calais Group, and interestingly all 5 countries were taking the same approach of recognising that we cannot take decisions currently. We clearly want to be able to do so as swiftly as possible, but however we need to monitor the situation in Syria in the meantime. She raised the importance of other partnership working, including with Europol and Eurojust. I agree with her in the importance of this. One of the things that we agreed firstly with Germany, but also then was confirmed as part of the Calais Group discussions, where Europol were also present with those discussions, is what we have been keen to establish is either a new Europol task force or an expanding one of the existing task forces to look particularly at the end-to-end smuggler route and its supply chains, particularly to be able to work with the Kurdish authorities and the Iraqi government on some of that end-to-end route involving some of the Iraqi Kurdish criminal smuggler gangs, that all of those, including the Iraqi government, are very keen to work with us on, but we need that Europol task force in place in order to be able to do that. We are also increasing on the asylum decision-making, we're increasing the caseworkers in post. We have substantially increased the pace of decisions. It had just plummeted, dropped by about 70% just before the election. We have got the extra caseworkers in place. We have got decisions back up now to where they were. That now allows us to clear the backlog on initial decisions. And finally, I agree with her, we need to continue to work on some of the source issues, and we are working closely with the Foreign Office on that.
Chris Murray.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I spent 15 years working on migration before I came to this House, including 3 years as the Home Affairs Attaché in Paris, where I saw firsthand how the kind of instruments the Home Secretary is describing and data sharing make a concrete difference in the fight against immigration crime. And I saw under the previous government how, as they pulled the UK out of these instruments, it made our job as officials harder. I couldn't welcome the statement the Home Secretary has made more. Immigration is an international phenomenon, and by definition, tackling immigration crime requires international cooperation. Can she tell us a bit more about the steps she's taken to build the relationship with these key European allies? And will she also commit to keeping her foot to the floor on this issue? Because in my experience, they can so easily be cut, but they take time and political will to bear fruit.
Well, my honourable friend has considerable experience in these issues, and I thank him for all of his work on this issue. And he is right that it's just something as basic as the right kind of information and intelligence sharing. If the systems are removed and there are no new systems put in place in order to be able to do that, then basic operational actions simply do not happen, either to go after the criminal gangs or to prevent dangerous boat crossings or dangerous criminal activities. So this is as basic as making sure now we have as much stronger systems, including using the Europol Siena system for the National Crime Agency, so that when the German police get the information from the National Crime Agency, it's actually in a form that they can swiftly use in order to pursue both investigations and prosecutions. So he's right, we actually have to get into making sure that the detail works, which is too often not been taken seriously for far too long.
Thank
you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Home Secretary's commitment to maintain the relationships with the Calais Group Interior Ministers that I was developing when I was in her role, and to build on the UK Frontex agreement that I signed with Commissioner Johansson in February of this year. But what I want her to explain to the House is, if the role of the Border Security Command was so clear, if the division of labour between it and the Small Boat Operational Command was so clear, and if this issue was so pressing, why has it taken 5 months to give them a mission?
Well, I do actually recognise the points that the former Home Secretary made, that he had, to be fair to him, he had to do a lot of work to try and repair the relationship with the Calais Group and with some of the European partners after some of his predecessors had been rather more careless, should we say, and rather more destructive in that relationship. But we have now still got these further agreements in place that are crucial practical arrangements about strengthening law enforcement cooperation to go after the criminal gangs. On the Border Security Command, I know it has been a sort of bugbear for him that he wants to see this as the same as the Small Boats Operational Command. These are very different. So the Small Boats Operational Command is rightly focused on the operations in the Channel and does some excellent work in terms of making sure that we can have order around the system in the Channel. But the Border Security Command is a much broader programme of work. It is, for example, Martin Hewitt travelled with me to Iraq and to Kurdistan in order to be able to build those operational relationships so that we work upstream. He was also part of the Calais Group meetings yesterday in order to build those cooperational arrangements as well. So we have provided continual updates, and we will continue to do so on the work of the Border Security Command, but already it's getting on with work that I'm afraid his party and he as Home Secretary never did.
Jonathan Brash.
Speaker. Can I welcome my honourable friend's statement today and the frankly grown-up approach she's taking to tackle this problem? Does my honourable friend recognise the fury that is felt by constituents in Hartlepool and elsewhere, that as this system collapsed over the last 5 years and the costs associated with this happened simultaneously to our public services being eviscerated? And does she understand that that is the reason why people in Hartlepool want this system fixed and fixed quickly?
Oh, my honourable friend makes a really important point, because Really what we saw was the loss of control of our border security, the loss of control along the channel where the criminal gangs were allowed to take hold, and the failure of chaos really that was allowed to develop in the asylum system. We also at the same time saw the loss of control around legal migration, where the new policies that were brought in meant that the figures quadrupled just in the space of 4 years. I think across the country, most people want us to have strong border security and also a properly controlled and managed migration system and asylum system, so that the system is properly fair and works for this country. We haven't had that for too long, and of course that has left people deeply frustrated and wanting change.
Matt Pritchard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can I actually welcome this joint action plan? It's in the national interest, our national security interest, that this works, and I hope it does. I'm also grateful for her points on Syrian asylum seekers, and we look forward to hearing more details as that story unfolds. She mentions working upstream. Could I encourage her to meet with the interior ministers of Algeria, of Libya, Morocco, Egypt, and Tunisia, and also interior ministers in the Sahel, because she will know a lot of that migration through the Mediterranean is coming out of North Africa, in particular Libya.
So the Honourable Member does make a really important point here about the work upstream. And I say to him that we did include interior ministers from North Africa as part of the G7 discussions in Italy in October. I think that was important and reflects a lot of the work that Italy, for example, has been leading around the work with North Africa countries. But I also agree with him about the importance of the Sahel, and some of the issues that we discussed in the Calais group yesterday included looking at some of those areas that either have instability or have been areas where people have been making dangerous journeys from. We actually need to engage with those countries. We talked about the Sahel, we talked about Central Africa, we also talked about Iraq and some of the Middle East areas, and we talked about Vietnam as well, where we saw significant increases in numbers of people arriving in small boats at the beginning of the year.
Melanie Arm.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to welcome the statement from the Home Secretary today and congratulate her team on the work that they are undertaking in this very difficult area. Back in 2021, the previous government committed to £62 million as part of an agreement with France that included strengthening law enforcement deployments, more wide area surveillance technology and vehicles, and enhanced physical measures at transport interchanges. Then in 2023 committed to a further £500 million, continuing in these agreements. And for my constituents in Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes, they see these financial commitments being made with our neighbours and these agreements, and yet at the same time over the past few years have just seen the problems increasing, so in terms of small boat crossings and backlogs. So what reassurance can she give my constituents that, that these agreements will make a difference, and that any funding agreements, because this goes to the heart of fairness, that those funding agreements bring about the change that people want to see?
Well, people clearly do want to see practical changes on the ground, and that's why the partnership working that we've been taking forward, not just with France but also with Belgium, the Netherlands, with Germany, with other countries as well, is so important. So that has been about some of the prevention work actually along the French coast and the work with the French authorities, but the reality is we have to be taking action long before either the boats or the engines or people or the gangs are reaching the French coast in the first place. And that is the fundamental difference with the approach that we are now taking compared to the previous government's work, is to be looking at how we work with other European countries to tackle the gangs before they reach the French coast in the first place. That is where we need the much stronger partnerships, and that is where many of our efforts have been focused.
Graham Ledbetter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The issue of the applications of the 6,500 Syrian asylum seekers has already been mentioned, but when our department does look at these claims, we should keep in mind that Syria's new leader is a committed jihadist who has voiced support for the 9/11 attacks. that there are therefore very serious questions remaining for women and minorities in particular, and that all paused asylum claims should be processed with that firmly in mind. And in a similar vein, that with increased efforts, which I fully support, to shut down illegal trafficking routes and dangerous trafficking routes in particular, that it's important that we have safe asylum routes for those who are still at significant risk.
Well, the honourable member makes an important point about the continuing instability. I mean, there is a lot we simply do not know about how events are going to play out in Syria. Those who have taken over and who were involved in the initial overthrow of the Assad regime has said initially that they would pursue an approach which supported minorities, for example, within Syria. But of course, we have seen further developments in recent days that raise questions about that, and we have also just seen the huge instability with different organisations and groups operating across the country. That is why we need to monitor this closely. I think everybody wants to see greater stability. We've also seen the initial signs of people wanting to return from Turkey to Syria, for example, in the first few days. But this is very unstable at the moment, and that is why we need to approach this with care and with monitoring the detail of what is happening.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The party opposite should be absolutely ashamed of their asylum and immigration policy and the inactivity and the complete mess that they left Britain and our borders in. Madam Deputy Speaker, anger and frustration they are showing is being shown by my constituents in Ports of North over the small boat arrivals, and they continue to fill my inboxes. When the Home Secretary came to power, she promised a relentless focus on these boats, and we have already heard today around cooperation with other countries, raids, arrests and seizures, and stronger enforcement. Will the Home Secretary assure constituents of Ports of North that this is not a gimmick and it will keep going over the focus of this winter period?
Well, our honourable friend is right that the only way to deal with this is not going to be through gimmicks. We've seen those fail time and time again. It's not going to be with the kind of posturing that the party opposite continued to do. It's only going to be done through partnership and through hard work and through hard graft. So yes, setting up the Border Security Command, getting in place the new agreements with other countries, not just in Europe but beyond, such as with Iraq and elsewhere, strengthening our law enforcement capabilities, the 150 million going into the Border Security Command over the next 2 years, and also getting on with the enforcement, the returns and enforcement that have substantially increased this summer as a result of the actions that we have taken to get enforcement and returns back on track after the failing system. This has to be done in a serious way. I think people are fed up of the gimmicks. The serious approach we need to take needs to be about getting a grip instead.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary hasn't answered very many questions today. Can she just answer this very clear question? Which metric should we use, and by which date, to allow us to judge whether the government has succeeded in smashing the gangs?
Well, I think everyone will be clear that no one should be making these dangerous boat crossings that undermine our border security and put lives at risk. We need to pursue the criminal gang networks that are spread right across Europe and beyond, and that is why we welcome some of the arrests that have taken place last week in Germany as a result of the French-led operations, as a result of the support from the National Crime Agency. We will continue to support and accelerate that work so that we can have the stronger action against the criminal gangs.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This week has seen the results of the work of the Home Secretary leading to the agreement with Germany. It's hard work and grip which gets results. It is incredible that under German law it was not prohibited to stockpile the boats and the engines that were used in the Channel. Can the Home Secretary assure us now that this agreement will lead to a path to closing this loophole and disrupting the work of the small boat gangs?
Well, Honourable Friend is right. This is a really practical issue because in order to disrupt the criminal gangs operating along the French coast, we need to disrupt their supply chains. We need to be able to go after the gangs wherever they are operating. One of the most basic issues that the previous government took no action on at all was the fact that the boats themselves, these flimsy and incredibly dangerous boats, were being shipped across Europe often being held in storage, in warehouses in Germany, but actually the legal framework in Germany made it very hard for the German police and prosecutors to then be able to take action against those smuggler gangs. So the basic thing that we have done now is reach agreement with Germany that they will strengthen their law to make it clear that using those boats or using the smuggler routes, in storing those boats, is about facilitating dangerous boat crossings and illegal crossings out of the EU and into the UK, and that in itself is a crime. So strengthening the law in that way helps us take action against those criminal gangs. The previous government just never chose to do it. It required diplomacy and hard work and shared commitment, and that is what we have done.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We all welcome the fall of Assad, and we look forward to him and his accomplices being dragged before the criminal courts to justify and suffer for the crimes against humanity. But the Home Secretary will know the current position in Syria is very complex, with a number of organisations that we have prescribed as organisations. Now, we understand that the government is considering taking a different view and allowing those people to come off the list of prescribed organisations. At the same time, we hear that money is being sent to Syria to help and assist the Syrians, which could fall in the hands of these prescribed organisations. So what action is she going to take to make sure that doesn't happen? And will she undertake to update the House, because this is a moving situation, we understand, update the House on any moves there are to de-prescribe these organisations?
Well, the honourable member raises an important issue. He will know that we don't routinely comment on either prescribing, de-prescribing or any of those processes. But let me just be clear on this, that the prescribing decisions that we take are done with care, based on evidence over time. They are not things that are done in a rush. They are not things that are done based on inadequate evidence. So these are always important issues, but the most important thing is the safety of the UK and the national security of the UK, and any decisions we take will always be taken in that light.
Jessica Turl.
Speaker, can I welcome the Home Secretary's statement and all the action her department is taking to tackle migrant smuggler gangs and reduce the asylum backlog. But frankly, I'm quite surprised by the reaction I've heard from the opposite benches, because either through inaction or incompetence, the last government left us with an inheritance of 400 asylum hotels at a cost to the taxpayer of £9 million per day. And they didn't seem very bothered about targets then. So constituents in my constituency, Bournemouth West, and across the country are rightly furious about this. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that if they were really serious about tackling illegal migration, they would take responsibility for their legacy, welcome our measures, rather than complaining about them?
Yeah. Well, my honourable friend is right, because we inherited a situation. The Conservatives just completely let this entire system get way out of control. They let criminal gangs take hold along the Channel. They left us with chaos, total chaos in the asylum system, and these extortionate costs of, as she rightly points out, this time last year, it was nearly £9 million a day that was being spent on asylum hotels. The result of the action that we have taken since the election to get asylum decision-makings going that they had frozen, to get the system working again, is already saving hundreds of millions of pounds for the taxpayer that the honourable members opposite were happy to spend rather than getting a grip of the system.
Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to hear from the Home Secretary that you're making progress with our neighbouring countries in Europe in stopping this, what I now call a national emergency. But as the Home Secretary probably knows, that's only a third of the issue. The boat crossings have increased. Will she consider detaining securely those people who do arrive here? Because if we're to solve this problem, we have to remove the incentive to come to Britain. The questions I'm asking are uncovering quite how much the cost of these illegal migrants is to the country. And this is now, as I say, a matter of national emergency. The third part of the equation is those illegal migrants who are here And I had a case in my constituency, Great Yarmouth, only this week, where one alias Amulata was convicted of drug dealing, a 17th offence, a very light sentence. So will she commit to deporting those illegal migrants here who are damaging the interests of the British electorate?
Yeah.
Well, we clearly need to clear the backlog that we have inherited in the asylum system and the chaos in the asylum system. There is already a detention system as part of both the immigration and asylum system, but the core issue, I think, that there has been over a long period of time is around the lack of proper enforcement and the lack of a proper system to ensure that the rules in the system, in both the asylum and the immigration system, are properly respected and enforced. We'd seen returns, for example, drop substantially compared to under the last Labour government, and what we've been doing is putting additional staff into the returns and enforcement system, but also making sure that those returns increase. That's why we have seen nearly 10,000 returns since the general election, significant increase in returns on both on foreign national offenders and on the failed asylum cases, to make sure that the system is properly respected.
Jo White. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When I was elected to Parliament, I promised my constituents in Bassetlaw that this government would have a relentless focus on stopping the boats. But I just want to clarify this point because I think it's very important. When this government came to office, the number of small boats arrivals for 2024 was running around 700 higher than the previous record year of 2022. Can the Home Secretary confirm that the number of arrivals since this government came to office is 11,000 lower than that equivalent period in 2022, when the party opposite was in charge and when the Rwanda deal was in place?
Hear, hear. Well, my honourable friend is right that the previous record year was 2022, and that for the first half of this year, 2024, when the previous government was still in office, the arrivals were actually higher for that season. We all know that the arrivals are affected by the season, but the arrivals in the first half of the year were actually higher this year than they were in 2022. Since the election, those arrivals have been significantly lower than they were in 2022. And had they continued at the record high levels that the previous government left us with, we would have had thousands more arrivals over the course of this year than we have in fact seen. Now, the reality is this is no comfort when lives are still being lost and when criminal gangs still take hold. But I think it is important to recognise that we have not continued with those record high levels that we inherited from the previous government, and we should have a comprehensive programme across the government and across the whole country to make sure we can tackle these dangerous gangs.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Until small boats are either stopped on French shores or intercepted in French waters, some boats will clearly continue to get through. So if in the next few weeks identified individuals from Syria, whether they be Assad's torturers or released Islamist fanatics, manage to come to Britain, what will be done to them? Will they be detained or will they be allowed to walk free?
Well, the honourable member will know that the Home Office has the power to deny entry to those who are not conducive to the public good. Those are important powers that the Home Office has that we continue to support. He will know that we also have other security powers and measures that we are able to use where there are individuals who pose a threat to the safety of the UK, and we will continue to take those extremely seriously.
Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. While the party opposite wasted £700 million of taxpayer money on an unworkable gimmick, this party, this government, is rolling up our sleeves and putting in place the agreements we need to tackle the gangs. That's the change that the British public voted for in July. That's the change we're delivering. Can I ask my right honourable friend what message the new agreement sends to the vile people smugglers putting lives at risk in the Channel? What message does this send to those criminals?
My honourable friend asked an important question, because the reality is that the criminal gangs operate across borders, and they have been able, frankly, to get away with it because of lack of coordination between law enforcement across borders, because of lack of coordination between governments across borders. And that is what we have been working to change since the election. That's why we have in place not just the Calais Group agreements, not just the agreement with the Joint Action Plan with Germany, but also the progress that we made at the G7 as well, and the discussions even right back at the beginning, just after the election, at the European Political Community meetings as well. We need that collaboration because the message has to be extremely clear to the criminal gangs. There will be no place to hide. They cannot just hide across borders, because governments and law enforcement will work together to go after them.
John Cooper.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you. This is a multi-headed hydra of a problem, there's no doubt about that. One of the ways that we could begin to tackle this is by using the proper language. Can we please stop talking about irregular arrivals and irregular journeys? That sounds like a coach tour that's taken a wrong turn. This is illegal immigration that we are dealing with here. We've heard much about international cooperation. That obviously is critical. So will the Home Secretary then undertake to strike a series of agreements with a range of countries to ensure that people can be returned to those countries should they be deemed safe?
So we've been clear that we need to reduce both legal and illegal migration, because we have seen significant increases in both over the last 5 years, and that is why we're setting out the policies that we've been introducing since the election. He's right to talk about really the multiple different aspects of this, and why you need to take action comprehensively across the board, and also that means the response has to be across the board, and has to include not just the prevention work, not just going after the criminal gangs, but increasing returns. It's possible to do that through new agreements. It's also possible to do that by, frankly, just making the existing system work considerably better, and that is what we have been doing throughout the summer, where we have already seen a significant increase in returns, and nearly 10,000 people returned who did not have the right to be in the UK.
Final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I, first of all, welcome the Secretary of State for her statement today, and we all agree that this House and across this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, that this issue of immigration very much needs to be realistically prevented. The Secretary of State, to give the Honourable Lady credit, has shown that determination and commitment through the statement today, and we welcome that, and we look forward to seeing the action on the ground. But can I just gently take the Secretary of State on another journey across to Northern Ireland? What discussion has taken place with the Republic of Ireland to secure the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, recognising that the Irish government implemented checks for their security? And I believe that the time has come for government here to do likewise, and to prevent immigration through the back door from Northern Ireland. Thanks very much.
Well, the honourable member will be aware we have long had a common travel area across the UK and Ireland. Of course, that has always meant we also have close security cooperation and information sharing to make sure that we can recognise that unique situation that we have. But that common travel area will continue, and we will also continue to work with the Irish government on, and the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland also takes these issues seriously to make sure that the system that we have works effectively.
That concludes this statement, and I'll just give the front benches a few moments to swap over.